It's a great one. I love Nomadland was amazing, by the way. So
I started that, and then Stephen wanted to watch it with me, and he never has time. So I'm 20 minutes in, and I'm like,
come on. We saw that last night, and I thought that's one of my favorites for a while. But I love her. Frances is just amazing.
Okay, Frances, if you're watching, can you executive produce my film? That's my dream adoptee, to have executive produce the film.
Filmmaker and adoptee Rebecca Autumn Sansom has teamed up with the author Nancy Verrier of the book The Primal Wound to make a feature-length documentary about the experience of being an adopted person. We're going to talk about the primal wound. We're going to talk about ourselves as adoptees and a whole lot more. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me. I was telling you before, but this is the first interview I've done about the movie. So that's exciting and nerve-wracking, but I'm really excited to be doing it with you. This is such an honor.
I want to ask you really quickly, because we talked about when you first got here, you were 30 seconds in. I think we were supposed to meet at 3 o'clock, and it was literally 3 minutes and 30 seconds in. So it wasn't even 3:01 yet. And you said, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to be late." And I know that I think your words were actually, I thought I was going to be on time. And there's this sense that I have in my life about perfectionism would be one thing, but also I remember when I was a kid, I really felt, and Nancy talks about this a lot, it's kind of like the bad kid treatment, right? And when I was being a bad kid, I only got noticed, it seemed, when I got help for being a bad kid. And I only got the help I needed when I was bad. But even that help, to me, was a rejection. Have you had that experience in your life, in your growing pains on this?
Oh yeah. And even being aware of it doesn't matter, right? Like, why did I say that to you? You're an adoptee. I don't have to apologize. In my life, it's being infantilized. And so I wasn't early, like a real adult would be, like a Schiffman would be. That's my family. That was my name growing up, Rebecca Schiffman. And then I got married and changed it. Had nothing to do with, like, I love the name Schiffman. But Schiffmans are always 15 minutes early. So I think also, but that's not who I am. Like, I have a hard time being 15 minutes early, 2 hours early to the airport, just from something in me. But my birth mother's similar. Like, she doesn't start the day until noon. Like, she just takes her time. And
do you find that's, it's interesting for me, because I know I don't like to do anything wrong, and I don't like to disappoint people. And so I know that being late, you're right. Why the heck would you worry about me? Kevin, sorry, I meant to be. And it was the phraseology. It wasn't just, I'm sorry, I'm late. I don't even think you said that. You said, I really, really, really meant to be on time. I really meant to be on time. And it's this intention we have that we seem to, I do in the back of my mind, is this self-critical voice that says, your best of intentions just keep falling short, Kevin. You're not measuring up. What a pain in the neck that tends to be, especially when we get married and other people are looking at us, scratching their head saying, you were right on time. What's the struggle here?
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. And like, I have the book here, and I just feel like if everyone that knew an adoptee or was in relationship with an adoptee would read the book, they would understand. And Nancy somehow was the catalyst to get this out. Because I think a lot of us we thought we were alone and had all these feelings and were, just like doomed until we realized it was a very common experience. So the movie is a tribute to Nancy, and just being able to say, like, it's not you, your brain is, it's just wired differently because of the separation trauma. So I'm thinking of the movie more like reckoning with relinquishment trauma as an adoptee, but also reckoning with the cultural phenomenon that is the book, The Primal Wound. Because again, like, adoptees love it, but adoptive parents don't love it. A lot of people don't love it. So there's also a lot of pushback on the book, and that we get into that in the movie too. because my mom's in the movie and she is not shy to say that, even though not like officially. Like if I was filming her, she'd slap my hand away and be like, I don't want to be in it, but you can put my voice in it. So it's kind of dramatic, but
I can't wait to meet her voice in the movie. She
yeah.
sounds very fun, and now I can see where you get it from.
But sometimes I did, like I would have my phone up like this, and she'd be just like, but down here, you know, like
Sure.
resting on the desk, and she'd be like, "Are you filming?" Because she'd be saying these gems, just dropping gems, and I'd be like, and then I ended up using a lot of it because they were gems, and then I thought what always had in my head that she was gonna make me cut it out before the final cut. But I put it in just in case.
It's funny. It's one of the reasons that I call this this segment that I've put together in conversation with, because I often want people to feel like they just walked by and caught a few words of a conversation, like anyone that's listening right now, and they just stopped and they said, "Oh, that sounds like something that, you know, might mean something to me." And we're just going to keep chatting away here. So if you're listening right now, just keep listening, because we're not going to think about ourselves as someone who has something to say to other people. We're just trying to talk to each other. And so when you get that, and I've done the same thing. How many times have I turned my phone on while I'm talking to my 92-year-old mother right down below me right now? And luckily her eyesight's not great and she can't catch the phone half the time. So, but I've done that with people because I don't want to miss those moments, and I don't want to miss what they're saying. And most of the time it's because I want to be present for the conversation. I don't want to be worrying about writing something down, thinking about what somebody said. And that's kind of why In Conversation With really materialized, was because I realized I was having a lot of chats with people over coffee. And I said, wouldn't it be amazing if someone could sit in and listen on this and think, gee, I'm going to rewind and listen to that again. I'm going to go back to the beginning and listen to the whole thing again. There's something in there that really echoed with my experience.
Kevin, yeah. And like, why are some of us like documentarians?
Right.
I don't know. And that's what I want people to take away from this. I am not making this movie for me at all. Like, I don't know why I have been the one to do this. I Googled, I couldn't believe no one had done this before, made a movie version of the Primal Wound, because the Primal Wound is still selling like hotcakes 28, 29 years later. That's a phenomenon. So I couldn't believe that. And then I was in my 3rd trimester with my daughter and had the feeling that I had to start this documentary. Like, I've had filmmaker friends my whole life tell me I should tell my story in a documentary form, but I never wanted to. But I had it in the back of my head that if I did, it would be like, you know, or that it was my destiny to eventually. I don't know how you felt about your memoir, like why you did that, but there's always something like, I know I'm going to do it someday. So I Googled, found out no one had done it before. I'm pregnant. I'm feeling all the feelings of, you know, childhood separation trauma and having a life inside of me. Nancy Verrier lived 45 miles away from where I lived at the time. And my boss at the time had just told me, and who's an adoptive parent, and I told her that I was thinking about doing this, that her friend Doris was like on Facebook recounting, trying to find her birth mother in real time. And the story was super dramatic and harrowing, and that I had to talk to Doris. So I emailed her. She told me her story. I was like, what? You know, come down to Palo Alto, because she was in California too, and let's do an interview. She came, she was there for 3 days. We got so much footage. And that was like, my due date's coming, but I'm filming, whatever. So then my mom didn't feel drawn to coming to the birth. Like that wasn't super interesting to her, which is fine. But I was like, well, I want who should be there. And then I decided to ask Jill to come. And I did not know, my birth mother, if she would come, but I thought that made sense. And she did. And then Frankie Jo, my daughter, was a week late, and Jill came 2 weeks early. So we had 3 weeks where we filmed because we had time. And then I had to be induced because Frankie Joe still didn't want to come. But when you're induced, I don't know what your birth story experiences are. You have a lot of downtime where you are able to film. So we had this compelling scene, like where Jill's just sitting in a hospital room talking about like giving me up. And I don't know, it was just kind of making itself. And so then I had Doris and Jill, and Nancy was responding. And then I Googled David Brodzinsky. He's like an hour and a half away from Palo Alto. So it was just happening. But that's why I did it. I felt a force. And I think it's the collective energy of all of the adoptees. This is not, I'm using my story, you know, because I had to. You have to do that. It's not a super harrowing story. It has some interesting bits in it. But I think, like you said, in conversation with, is about, you know, you're just going to pull what you need to hear. And the total runtime of the film is like 100 minutes, which I wrestle with. I'm like, is that too long? But I can't cut anything because I think everything's in there for somebody, you know? So that's where I am with it.
It's an amazing question to have, is why do we do this? In other words, if you've started reading my book and you know much of my story, enough of it. And most people would say to me when I was writing the book, because if you ask me why I started writing it, was, well, in part it was because I would tell people, it would be me chatting with someone and saying, you know, this is my experiences with my search, with my, interactions with my world. And people would say, my gosh, Kevin, you've got to write that. And I would scratch my head and say, oh, maybe. And then I would keep going and keep going. And eventually I really recognized that this was kind of out of my hands already. The fact that I was really able to convey the experiences verbally, even just talking with people, already told me and others that I was a storyteller, that I was able to put together the pieces verbally. Now, whether I could put that into a book and, put a cover on it and, get it all edited, I didn't know if I could do any of that. My whole thing in life has been learning that there's a big line between disappointment and regrets. And I have to ask myself every day, will I be disappointed? Say, if I was you, if I was in your seat, I'd say, well, if I do all this work and do this documentary and it just comes and I go to the editing table and it just, I can't, this ain't working. Will I be disappointed? Yes. Will I regret it? No.
Oh, I love that.
If I get it to distribution and everyone says they love it, but it doesn't get picked up, right, by Netflix or Amazon, or
that's where I am right now. Yes.
Frances McDormand doesn't come in and produce it. Frances, we're talking to you now. We're channeling right to you. And they say, no. Will I be disappointed? Yes. Will I regret it? No. And I have to find out what that regret is. And for me, the regret was simple. It usually is, I will regret if I don't try.
Yes. And that's what I felt, but I didn't know how to say it. That is really eloquent. And I'm not a great storyteller. I am not the academic one. I have academics in my movie because I've always been really passionate about finding experts who write books and then putting what they wrote in a academic journal that the masses are not going to read, but it's really good information. Like I did this with my high-speed rail documentary. It's like, there's so much in here about passenger rail that these experts are saying and should be selling everybody on. They're never going to read this. So let's make it a movie. And that's what I'm doing with the Primal Wound, because more and more people aren't reading, unfortunately. But I think this is a great thing to have a movie version of.
And I'm going to ask you, you mentioned this, so I'm going to ask you, a lot of us talk about the primal wound. Some people will call it the Bible. Others will call it the satanic verses, whatever you want to play with there. And I'm trying to make light of it here. The truth is, it's a very important book to many people. And people have very strong visceral reactions to it. Do you expect do you expect and I don't want to, you don't have to give away too much, the way you are positioning this documentary, the way you're creating it, the way you're visualizing what the viewer, the recipient of it, do you think people will also have these strong reactions? Or are you trying to bring us closer to the middle?
That's a great question. And to go back to me, like surreptitiously filming my mom and thinking there's no way she's going to sign off on this as an adoptive parent who I mean, we talk about things and kind of get on, it's a hard movie I thought it would be the hardest on them to watch. They signed off on it and said it was good.
Wow. Wow. That's powerful.
So I think that says what I'm hoping other people will say. I think in the middle, that's a good way to.
I had a very interesting, I would say, opposite reaction from the people who read my book. I had 12 beta readers. And one of them was I work a 12-step program. One of them was my 12-step sponsor, Richard. Okay. Hi, Richard. I always say hi to Richard during these. And, hi, Richard. And another was a dear friend I've known for over 30 years. And, some people who read it were people who have known me, but aren't family and aren't people who've known me for 20, 30, 40 years. And that was the way. I didn't want to write my book to be confrontational or controversial. I'm not trying to get any kind of, viral moment going here. I just had to be honest. And I had to be creative. I had to use my talents. I had to use my skills. And you'll see as you're reading through it, there'll be moments that you'll say, oh, that's what Kevin was talking about. You'll say, oh, geez, oh, wait a minute. I've got to go wash my hands before I read a little more here, because it does take you aback. But then all of a sudden you realize that's the point of it. Don't judge a book by its cover here. The book is this beautiful cover and it's this very welcoming, and look at me. I'm just some guy, right? I'm just some easygoing guy. You would never think I had a story. Don't judge the book by its cover. We've all gone through some traumas. We've all gone through various manifestations in our travels. And the important thing is to reduce the stigma on that. And I think if you can do that, because the Primal Wound, you're obviously right. It took me a long time to want to read it. As an adoptee, I was resistant to it. And then when I finally got to the breaking point where I said, oh, I've got to spend some time on this. And I spent the whole summer reading it. And, once I got over my fear, I would say, and my real sense of knee-jerk kind of, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. And I opened up to it. I said, oh my goodness, this is all me. I don't want to say it explained everything, but it made me feel less alone. Yeah. And then it opened up an entire community.
Yes, that's everything. And why we have to do this, I think, is for the people that we don't even know or that we do know. I know a lot of adoptees who, have the Primal Wound on their bookshelf, but they haven't gotten there yet. And it took me years and years. And it was the third adoptee I met randomly that asked me if I'd read it, that I was like, oh, okay, I guess I got to read this book. Cause I think that happened in England. Like it was in different countries where I was getting that question. I was like, why is it up with this book? Why is everybody talking about it? But you're going to be crying like pretty immediately when you start the book. So then it's hard to keep going. I get that.
I don't, it's one of those books that a lot of people have read. And if we're talking here, and if you haven't read the book, The Primal Wound, it's segmented in 3 different ways. That makes it really rather interesting as an adoptee to read, because it's speaking to the various constituents of the adoptee world. But even the end of it is it's almost like I want to breeze through it because it's talking to professionals. There's not a lot of books that are quite written that way. Many books now try to really weave those stories together. But there's a wonderful book. If you ever get it, we're just going to segue for a minute from The Primal Wound, because Nancy's book is really so poignant and so powerful and so present in our lives. There's a book by Pauline Boss called Ambiguous Loss. Now that book was written about, she started as the research of people who have lost people during a wartime. So they were missing in action, not POWs, right? Because if you know they're a POW, you know at least where they are. And not KIA, not killed in action, but MIA. We don't know. That ambiguity is this incredible kind of loss that most people don't understand.
Oh,
It's impossible to grieve properly.
yes. And my husband, who is the academic, read a paper by a colleague, and it was called epistemicide. And it's about how when you take people and enslave them, you are separating their family history too, and or taking whole like societies of people away from, I think South America was the example, and they lost like this way of cultivating the land for that specific region because these people were removed from there, and then nobody could actually use this land anymore. And it's called epistemicide, and it made him think of me and adoptees, and it's the loss, the destruction of existing knowledge. I think that's the definition. And
That is
I was like,
incredible. The destruction of existing knowledge.
and that is what you're saying, kind of. And yeah, right. I don't know if anyone's talking about this. This happened last week, but if we explored this through adoption, and my main thing with the movie is, come on, you have to be able to empathize with what that would mean. Like, no one wants to go there and think about like what.
Well, let me put it this way. This is my understanding. I've done a lot of grieving in my life, and I've really struggled with it. And my therapist is a grief counselor, and I've been lucky that, you know, she's not an adoptee specialist, but I've really geared in to understand that a lot of what I've struggled with, this loss, is a grief that needs to be processed and is almost impossible to formally, correctly, fully process. So then there's a living with the ambiguity. There's a living with that grief. There's a living with that. How do people live with it? Because if somebody died, my dad died 10 years ago, that was awful. Oh my gosh, was that awful. I went into a depression I'd never seen before, and I didn't see it coming. But that's more, you can tell people about that, right? My dad died. I didn't handle it well. I became depressed. I needed medication. I needed that. People will listen to that because they can understand that. That's something that they can understand. But let me say to them, can you say their mother and father is still alive? And I want to say to them, can you imagine for a minute your father dying? And they'll say, oh no. And I'll say, if I would never do this to someone, but I want to say to them, no, literally, I want you to sit with me and I want you to imagine your father dying. Can you sit and let that get into your body? They can't. That's unfair to ask people to do that. No. And it's unnecessary to ask people to do that. So the real job that Nancy had was asking people, can you imagine this? And they're saying, no, I can't imagine this. And then we have to be able to say to them, well, then let me tell you, let me share with you what it was like for me. And then people can listen to that, and hopefully inch by inch, just a little bit at a time, can have a little bit more willingness to have empathy for the person that's going through this ambiguous loss. And boy, you're going to have to send that to me later, that paper, and I'm going to need a link. Get your husband to give it to me. I'll put it in the notes below. So anyone that's interested and you're listening now, go down to the description. Hopefully we'll get a good link. But there is a wonderful piece in the Ambiguous Loss book that talks about this, what we're talking about now, unspoken ambiguity. I lived my whole life with, well, you're happily, your parents are nice, you're happily adopted, everything's fine, right? Yes, and it wasn't, because there was this unspoken ambiguity. But one of the things that the Ambiguous book focuses on is the difference between the unspoken ambiguity. Well, what do you speak of? And the truth is, in my life, it's been fluidity. We talked about that early on, because my relationships that are sometimes seemingly, there's people in my life, right? I've got a mother and father that are present physically, right? But I've got also a mother and father, right? Somewhere, I don't know who they are. And they're not present physically, but they're present mentally. They're present emotionally. And how do you deal with that? And that's what I think that I'm trying to understand for myself. I try to do the self-talk about understanding that fluidity and understanding that sometimes it's going to feel like they're here and sometimes it's going to feel like they're not. And I don't know how you do that with a little kid, because that's a real trick, but I think it's about communicating.
Yeah, and talking about it more than just once, because that's how I found out. I think I was just a happy-go-lucky kid. And then I think I was 3 or 4. And I got you have another mommy out there. I don't remember the rest of that sentence or if there was more said, because I stopped on that and it's like, okay. And like, what the, like the more, even my 4-year-old self, I remember just walking to school and humming and thinking that over and over again, like, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's one of those moments
thinking about it.
When you hear something like that and you look and you smile and you go, wait, what? and you've got to go out and play with your friends, and you've got to do your homework, and you've got, your peas to eat, and you're trying to process all the different things as time goes by. But you made a really good point, and I want to follow that for a second. Keep talking about it, because what I understand when I'm 5, 10, 15, 30, 40, 50, even 60 is going to be a different understanding. And the understandings aren't just intellectual, are they? They're head, heart, deep in my gut, and all the way down to my bone. So that's where we get to the primal wound. When we're really talking about understanding the primal wound is not a once and done. You don't read the book and go, boy, I got that. Now everything's fixed. It's the beginning of an understanding that changes as we grow.
And that's one of the things in the trailer. It was hard for me to do the trailer. And then my real Emmy Award winning mentor did another pass. And I was like, oh, that's really good. So that's why there's 2 trailers on YouTube. One's on my Rebecca Sansom YouTube, and the other one's on the Reckoning with the Primal Wound YouTube, the 1.5-minute version. But they both have the box in there. And the box seems to be confusing to people. And this isn't a spoiler because it's in the trailer. Jill, our first conversation on the phone, when she asks me, did you get the box? And I say, what box? That is like literally how the conversation went. So I didn't get the box, obviously, but the box to me symbolizes betrayal and secrecy. And I can't relate to late discovery adoptees, or I never thought I could until this whole thing with the box that Jill thought she gave to my parents to give to me when I was old enough to understand. And that's what you're saying. Like things, like you can process things differently if you just keep talking about them. So my parents got stuck in, a baby isn't going to be able to deal with this. And then when we moved, when I was 6, it was like, well, are we really going to keep this?
There's an incredible part in the book that, of course, the name of the book is Dear Stephen Michael's Mother, but you don't know why it's named that. I don't think I told you. So at some point you're going to get to the chapter and you're going to find why I named the book Dear Stephen Michael's Mother. And because I don't think I told you that. I don't think I did.
Is it not in the beginning?
Well, it's there, but you have to get it. But
like you get more into it.
There is a reason, and you're right. It's at the very beginning. But you have.
Okay, maybe I just assumed.
No. Oh. That's. I'm sorry. I don't want to blow that. It's so hard to talk about things in these ways that they're not spoilers. Yes, I open the door a crack, don't I? Right at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and then because we'll just be honest here. There's a part where it's a letter, and you get to that point, but later you'll find out more about that letter. And when you find out about that letter, you'll understand why I had to title the book Dear Stephen Michael's Mother, because there's where it's not just about fluidity, it's just about what you expect is true almost always as an adoptee, for me, seems to come in from the very upside down, inside out, wrong side right understanding. So I know you think you know what that letter is, and when you get there you'll go, damn it, Kevin. And the interesting thing is that you'll have to get through the book, and it's a little easier to talk with, I don't want to spoil it for any listeners here, but of course it's been years since, that search concluded, and there's been different changes in my life since then. And just a couple of months ago, and I won't tell you the details because again, it spoils too much, but I'll wait till you're done with the book.
Okay.
Just a couple of months ago, some enormously valuable information that could have been that somebody thought they had told me came to light. And but I'm at the point now where I've gotten so not accustomed, but I've gotten more I've got a deeper understanding that that's the fluidity of life. That's the mutability of life. That's the unsurety. Ambiguity isn't really healthy for me, but understanding that certainty isn't helpful for me either, right? Locking in on something for certain and feeling like that's my standing now, that's where I'm going to be. That certainty can be shaken 10 years later. And it can change everything. So understanding that when that certainty or my assuredness that, yes, these are the facts of my life now, when those change later, I'm much less likely to feel like I'm being abandoned again. I'm much less likely to feel like that is a revisiting, right, or PTSD as we would call it, of the primal wound.
And that's because you're doing all this hard work.
That's because I read the Primal Wound. I'm going to read something. No, it's true.
Nancy's going to be so pleased with
It's true. I'm going to read the passage, and I want you to listen. And then this is how I really want to wrap on this. When one has finally laid to rest the paralyzing effect of loss by remembering it, talking about it, then destroying it, it will be time to find a means by which to take one's power back. It must be remembered that it is because of a long-held belief that that power was given up. That belief is often based upon loss and involves fear. In the case of adoptees, it is the loss of the mother and the fear of another abandonment. This fear persists into adulthood, even though one cannot be abandoned as an adult. One can be left, but one cannot be abandoned because this implies helplessness at being left. One can feel helpless, but as an adult, one is not helpless. An adult has many resources and can live by those resources. He will not die.
You were saying that the book is divvied up, and the movie's divvied up in the same way the book is. So it's the wound, the manifestations, and the healing. It's so hard to do the work, but it's not impossible. It's just believing that truth, because there might be adoptees out there listening to this and being like, well, I'm never going to find out anything like that, because I didn't ever think I'd find anything out like the box, like what you don't know, what you don't know, and in adoption, it seems to be okay. It doesn't matter if it's super religious and you think that religion's going to cover you with the secrecy and betrayal thing, because that's not how it goes. There's secrets and betrayal all over the place in adoption. It's just common. We have 2 birth certificates. The government said it's okay.
I'm glad that the documentary is focusing on the primal wound, and I'm also glad that it's geared toward the constellation.
I'm really glad you used the word constellation, because you so often hear triad, but it's more like a square. And one of the things, Nancy wrote another book called Coming Home to Self after the Primal Wound. And I do use some things from that book too. And one of those things is talking about the siblings that usually exist in these families and how adoption affects them. And not knowing about me affected my half brother and half sisters. That's right. Kind of a big part of the movie. And
really it affects my own family now.
Wow, yeah.
That's my wife immensely. One of the videos I made, somebody actually requested it, can you make a video of,
being in a relationship?
Being in a, I don't know if you saw that one, but, I had to brave that one and talk about it with permission from Ellie, my wife. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And people have been really responsive to that, because that is really, my adoption is my primal wound. Let's just put it better that way. Not my adoption, not this, the primal wound is really, really helpful to speak about it in those terms, whether you agree with everything in the book or not, because trying to find some kind of, not starting point, but at least some common language that we can use, some common understanding of what these experiences mean. And if everyone looks at me and says, what are you talking about, the primal wound? You're happy. You've got, your life is all together. Your parents loved you or didn't love you or this, or you're an adult now. Why are you still talking about this? And understanding, folks, this is a trauma that, will never relinquish me. I will always be, a part of that primal wound will always be a part of me. It's how I negotiate that and how I talk to other people and how I discuss it with my own children, with your little one, right? How does that affect your family?
Thinking about that. Yeah. But I found on page 14, Nancy said, for these babies and their mothers, relinquishment and adoption are not concepts. They are experiences from which neither fully recovers. And I feel like that's the main plot point of the film, really, because it's me and Jill's story. But yeah, you said like it's primal. Like you never take a kitten home 2 days later, right? Are you even allowed to? I don't think that's even, I think that's frowned upon.
One of my favorite books to refer to this is the book called About the Little Bird, and it says, "You're not my mother."
Yeah.
Right. And there's actually a video that uses that. I can't believe it. I got to remember to go back and look at that one. But it's that whole idea, of what that book says and how there's a manifestation of a bird that has been lost, but the mother is looking for it and wants it and is waiting for it. And the wonder of that book to me, when, as an adoptee, because it breaks my heart, is that everyone, especially, was kind of trying to help along the way. Like, I'm not your mother. And, so there were these ups and downs in this manifestation of I'm lost and, I'm lost, but and then I don't know if you remember the end of it, but it's the scoop. They call it the snort. I think it is the snort, which is, it's this big, piece of heavy machinery equipment that scoops it up in the air. And the bird says, "You're not my mother." And then this huge heavy lifting machine, I forget what you call it, but I call it a shovel car. And it takes the bird and drops it back in its nest. Now, from a theatrical perspective, because you and I understand that, that's a deus ex machina. That is the hand of God saying, "I'm going to bring you back to you." Literally. And so I've seen all that in my life. I know that is not always going to be possible, where we find that we are placed back in the sense of being saved, being returned, being known again. But that doesn't mean that every step along the way of that bird's journey wasn't of value, wasn't of meaning. And that's what I want to continue to remember. And you said it, right? Yeah. It's really, don't give up hope. If you're listening to this right now, it doesn't mean that your story is going to end up like ours. Ours didn't end up like ours. Mine and Rebecca's are completely different stories. Yeah. And yet each one of us, we're still writing that story. We're still in the throes of that journey of that little bird saying, "Who's my mother? Where's my mother?" And mostly what I've really understood with that story, that darn shovel car, is I'm looking for and pardon the expression, if it offends anyone that's listening, you mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter if it's religious or this, but some kind of a spiritual sense of belonging in this world. And I find that much of that comes from my daily walk today, my connection with other adoptees, my connection in community, because sometimes I'm not going to be able to reconcile or find my biological roots. I'm not going to be able to have those relationships, or even if I do, they may not be the ones that I want. So I have to continue to make that journey in the community that I have, in the community that I'm given, in the community that I can find and create for myself. But part of that journey is finding out, how do I heal from this primal wound? Because I'm going to be a primal wound. I'm going to be someone who's in pain unless I deal with this. And that means I'm going to bring that pain to basically any relationship that I have. And that's what I owe myself. And that's what I owe other people in my life. It's not that I want to heal from this because everything will be perfect in my life, but I want to heal from this because I want to have the best relationships with myself and with other people in my life as I move forward. And that's a worthy endeavor, I think.
Yeah, it's the same reason you get the vaccine. Sorry, I'm going to make this so controversial.
Did we go there?
Talking about religion.
That's right. No, it's a fun one. It's a fun one. And I try to talk about spirituality, religion, or any of these things with what my friend Diane Cameron, I love you, Diane, thank you, with a light touch. Right. It's not that I don't have a spiritual essence and a spiritual, ilk and a spiritual walk.
Same.
But mine doesn't have to be yours. And if
Yeah.
yours is Buddhist or Christian or, anything that you're following, it doesn't matter what you're doing. That's the walk that you have. And even if it's atheism or agnostics,
Totally.
whatever walk you're on, if it's just walking the dog is the best connection that you have to a spiritual nature, whatever that means for you is the cool thing. And those are the conversations that we want to have a light touch about. The Primal Wound, as we know, the book is not a light touch. It is not heavy-handed, but it is fairly straightforward and well-researched, well-explained, really once in a lifetime, I think, once in a generation exposure to something that many people misunderstand and many people have misconstrued as a lovely gesture of humanity and community. And what we're saying is we understand there seems to be some positive aspects to the need for children to be cared for, right? And to be in loving and healthy environments. We're saying that that doesn't mean that because those aspects are needed or maybe even wanted by some people, that there aren't ramifications to that are pretty serious and can be debilitating, long lasting, and can really do much more harm than good sometimes, even with the best of intentions.
Yes, exactly. God, I'm so glad you're better at saying all this than I am. I need to write down everything Kevin's saying for any other interviews I do.
No, we're having fun. I think that we will, the real one question I'm going to ask for you, and you can tell, we're going to wrap up in a minute. You can find out, everyone that's listening, you can find out where to get in touch with Rebecca. And when it comes to your place in the journey and this understanding of, I will not die. That last line that I read, I will not die. I know for me, that was the risk of being able to take that Nancy had given us and own that what she's talking about is a power that has been taken away from us and that we can reclaim. Where are you in that journey of reclaiming that power?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. And I listen to Adoptees on and other adoption podcasts all the time. And they said similar things or talked about like how it's okay to have control of your own life. And I feel like I'm not there yet. Like I still have a lot of work to do. But I've gotten a lot better about that as well. So yeah, I'm glad you read it and I heard it again. Because it's something that I should probably put on a sticky. It's so, and it kind of goes back to bookend with how I started this. You can kind of tell where I am by how I was like, why wasn't I better? Why am I like subconsciously disappointed in myself all the time? Like, what is that? What is wrong with me? So I'm still definitely working on it and it's hard. But I'm in therapy and I have a really great therapist, but it's only been a year and a half. So I feel like I'm super new to this healing thing, healing the right way. And I'm interested in the internal family systems. I don't know if you have done that, but like thinking about each part of you. And so there's definitely a part of me that might even be suicidal, but like that's okay. And probably relatable to a lot of people, but I haven't like ever done anything about that, but it exists. And I heard somebody talking about that yesterday on a podcast and I was like, whoa, wow. There probably is a suicidal part of everybody if they allow themselves to go there. But when you use the word die, it's like, that's like real. And I want people to not feel isolated because there's so many of us that feel this way and it's not our fault. And being in community and connected to other people is the best thing. I don't know. Not everyone gets like positive energy from other people, but I do. And I feel like being in community is never a bad thing. So that's what I want. And I know adoptees in my life who I'm making this movie for, that I want to get that message. I could talk to you for like 3 more hours about this stuff.
Anyone who's listening right now was waiting for us to talk like this. Anyone who's listening right now, first of all, I do want to say we just mentioned suicide and dying and those ideations. And we want to be clear because I've been suicidal. There's a video out there if you want to go see it. First of all, I want to say if you are having any issues right now and you're feeling anything, you may want to pause this video, come back to it later because talking about suicide and talking about suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation can be really triggering to some folks. But also at the same time, that's one of my main points of speaking about adoption and speaking about sexual abuse and speaking about the addiction and now using the words adoption, primal wound, adoptee, child sexual abuse. All these words can be super triggering. The problem is if we don't use them, they stay in the dark.
Yes.
And they become a deeper and deeper stigma for us to ever talk about. And what I'm hoping is the way you just spoke, right? The way we're talking now is going to allow anyone who's listening, no matter where they are in the journey, to recognize, oh, I'm okay. Either I'm feeling terrible or I'm feeling great, or I'm in that middle of the ups and downs, but I'm not alone anymore. Rebecca's on that journey too. Kevin's on that journey. And you're right. Some of us are going to want to be in large communities, interacting with lots of people. Others like the one-on-one. Some people just need to be in their garden, right? And whatever that means to you, to be in a sense of community, whether it's, but let's connect with that sense of belonging, that sense of not being alone. And I think I'm talking about it to my friend Tom earlier today. Hey, Tom. And biggest important thing is he says, I don't do coffee with people. He says, I don't, people are always saying, let's go out for coffee. He says, I've only done coffee once. It was with you, Kevin. We went out to Professor Jarvis and went to coffee. He says, I said, are you serious? He said, yeah. And I said, but we meet on Zoom every week for like the last year and a half. And that's the whole point. We're not drinking coffee, but that's what it means. Let's go have coffee. Let's go have lunch. Let's have a Zoom session. Let's take a walk around the block. Let's spend the time together so that we don't feel like we're doing this alone. And when you shared the way you just shared, you just opened up your whole heart and life to the community around you in a way that shows that we can trust each other. We can grow together. And I'm really grateful for that because that's what we are all about. That's why we're making that. That's why you're making that documentary. That's why I wrote the book. That's the big why. That's the big why.
Exactly. And that's why I use the hashtag #OurFilm, which hasn't started trending yet, but
we're going to get it there. Everybody, hashtag #OurFilm. Rebecca, tell everybody what you'd like them to know, where they can find out more about you and the documentary and our film.
Everyone, and so many of you have been asking like how you can see it, when it's coming out. So I also want to say, follow us on Instagram, reckoning_with_the Primal Wound. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. And the website has a newsletter sign up, which is reckoningwiththeprimalwound.com. I've been pretty consistent putting out newsletters and being very transparent with the distribution process. So in a very unsure of how to best distribute this film, but I'm trying to get an international streaming deal with Netflix. So the way to do that, that means you can't do certain things. So I love that people want to screen the film in different countries and everything, but I can't answer that question yet because I can't do screenings because I've decided to try to get on Netflix. And I don't know if that's the right way to go about it, but I'm hoping that more clarity will come. I'm meeting with, film friends that know better, but I've never made anything that people want to see so badly. So it's exciting. And I think the more of us, I call it the adoptee army. And if you send me your name, you can DM me or email me, reckoningwiththeprimalwound@gmail.com, your name that you feel comfortable using. I'll put it in the credits under the adoptee army section, because I feel like when I hear the reaction, when my husband's telling people about this film, they're like, what? I don't know if the world is ready for this movie. But I definitely want us to be like, you know, we got to mount up and be ready for whatever pushback happens together. And I think that's why I'm being transparent about the distribution, because I don't even want to say the word rejection, but like, I feel like, since if I'm being transparent, I'm telling you where I'm submitting it with film festivals, that I'm trying to get the biggest thing ever, that we can all handle whatever happens together and that it will get seen, you know? So that's my hope. And that is literally what's happening. And if you sign up for the newsletter, you're going to get even more of this transparent talk about what's going on.
Thank you, Rebecca. And that's the whole point of this. We know there'll be disappointments. There's disappointments yesterday, today, and tomorrow, but we're going to do this together. And we will not die. We will survive. We will not die. Filmmaker and adoptee Rebecca Autumn Sansom has teamed up with the author Nancy Verrier of the book, The Primal Wound, to make a feature-length documentary about the experience of being an adopted person. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for taking the time to meet with me today.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being in the film too, Kevin.
You just blew it. You just blew it. We weren't supposed to tell anybody that. Oh, wonderful. We'll chat again soon. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.